Little Jimmy Dickens, the Rhinestone pioneer of country music, the deep dive.
Dive into the oversized legacy of little Jimmy Dickens, the 4'10" giant of country music. From his early days on the Grand Ole Opry to accidentally inspiring Hank Williams' classic Hey Good Lookin', this deep dive unpacks the surprising history of the man who introduced rhinestone suits and unapologetic comedy to country music. Whether you are a lifelong country fan or just love a story of a unique trailblazer, join us as we explore the life, the laughs, and the enduring impact of Tater.
Little Jimmy Dickens, Grand Ole Opry, country music history, Hank Williams, Rhinestone outfits, Country Music Hall of Fame, Brad Paisley, novelty songs.
Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, if you are looking to understand how an outsider forces basically an entire industry to adapt to their unique vision, you are definitely in the right place today.
Absolutely.
Our mission today is to explore the life, the career, and the really massive cultural legacy of James Cecil Dickens.
Though he's infinitely better known as Little Jimmy Dickens.
Right, and we are using a beautifully detailed Wikipedia article on his life as our sole source to map out this journey. So to start us off, I want you to hold a really specific visual in your mind.
Okay, set the scene.
We are looking at a man who stood just 4'10" tall. A man who eventually became the oldest living member of the Grand Ole Opry.
Wow.
Yeah, and someone who is actually credited with single-handedly introducing rhinestone-studded outfits to live country music performances.
I mean, that visual alone really sets the stage perfectly because this deep dive, it's not just your standard chronological biography.
No, not at all.
It functions as a masterclass in how an individual can take the very traits that make them different. So in his case, his starkly short stature and this deeply unapologetic sense of humor, and turn them into a decades-long globe-trotting cultural phenomenon.
It's incredible.
Right. We're looking at a performer who secured a spot in the Country Music Hall of Fame and collaborated with everyone from Hank Williams in the 1940s to Brad Paisley in the 21st century.
Talk about longevity.
Exactly. It's a study in leaning into who you are, completely and fearlessly, in an industry that usually demands conformity.
So to understand how he built that kind of leverage, we have to look at the foundation of his career. Our source places his beginnings in Bolt, West Virginia. He was born there in 1920.
A true coal country start.
Yeah. And by the late 1930s, he was already attending West Virginia University while simultaneously launching his musical career on a local radio station, WJLS in Beckley.
Getting that early broadcast experience.
Right. He was gaining real-world experience working alongside established regional performers. People like Mel Steele, Molly O'Day, and Johnny Bales. But getting a foothold in the 1930s meant mastering a very specific kind of media landscape.
Oh, for sure.
How did that local radio syndication model actually operate for an independent artist back then?
Well, it was incredibly grueling physical work. You have to remember the context of the 1930s and 40s. Local radio was the absolute lifeblood of the music industry.
Because there's no internet, obviously.
Right. And television wasn't ubiquitous yet, so it was the primary mechanism for building an audience. You couldn't just drop a single online. You had to physically travel to these powerful regional transmitters and play live.
Every single day.
Pretty much. And Jimmy didn't just stay broadcast out of West Virginia. By the 1940s, he was hosting his own radio programs across multiple states. We're talking West Virginia, Indiana, Kansas, and Ohio.
That is a lot of driving.
A ton of driving. This wasn't a casual hobby. It required this relentless, exhausting drive. And he eventually made a massive leap of faith. He completely quit his college education to pursue music full-time.
Just walked away from the degree.
Exactly. Traveled the country and performed under the stage name Jimmy the Kid.
Jimmy the Kid. I love that. And that relentless touring is what eventually put him in the right place at the right time.
It always does.
The source points to 1948 as his massive breakthrough, but it happened in a really serendipitous way. He was technically performing for a radio station out of Saginaw, Michigan, WKNX, but he was physically on location at a venue called Buck Lake Ranch that was in Angola, Indiana.
Okay, so he's in Indiana.
Right. And country legend Roy Acuff just happens to be there and hears him perform. Acuff was so impressed that he personally introduced Jimmy to Art Satterley at Columbia Records.
That is huge.
Yeah, and to the booking officials at the Grand Ole Opry.
We really should contextualize Roy Acuff's influence here. In 1948, Acuff was essentially country music royalty.
A king of country.
Exactly. So an introduction from him wasn't just a polite networking opportunity, it was a kingmaker move. By September of that year, Jimmy was signed to a major label with Columbia
And
Records.
by August, he had officially joined the Grand Ole Opry.
Just a total whirlwind. And it was right around this pivotal transition that he underwent this brilliant piece of personal brand.
Oh, right, the name change.
Yes. He dropped Jimmy the Kid and adopted Little Jimmy Dickens. He directly highlighted his short stature rather than trying to downplay it or hide it.
Which brings us to one of his most lasting contributions. The source explicitly credits Little Jimmy Dickens with introducing rhinestone-studded outfits into live country music performances.
It's hard to believe it was just one guy who started that.
It is. It's difficult to overstate how important that is, considering the rhinestone suit became the defining visual aesthetic of classic country music.
It was a massive paradigm shift for the genre. Prior to this, country music was frequently marketed and viewed as hillbilly or strictly working-class music.
Very blue-collar.
Right. The aesthetic was largely denim, boots, understated Western wear. Injecting Las Vegas-style rhinestone glamour into the mix totally elevated the genre's theatricality.
It makes them look like actual stars.
Exactly. It increased the commercial appeal by making the performers look like undeniable superstars. And for Dickens, it was a highly calculated move. Think about it, if you are 4'10", how do you stand out on a crowded stage of tall guitar players?
You literally reflect the spotlight.
Yes. You make sure that even the person in the very back row of the Opry House cannot take their eyes off you. He compensated for his height with pure, unfiltered spectacle.
That is so smart. So he secured the aesthetic, he got the Opry spot, and the Columbia Records deal. The next requirement was a reliable stream of hits.
Music has to back it up.
Right, and Dickens found a highly lucrative lane in humorous novelty songs. The source lists tracks from this era with titles like Country Boy, A Sleeping at the Foot of the Bed, and I'm Little But I'm Loud.
Great titles.
But the song that truly changed his trajectory was called Take an Old Cold Tater and Wait.
That specific track is what catalyzed one of the most important professional and personal relationships of his entire career.
Yes.
The song was such a massive hit that it prompted Hank Williams to start calling Jimmy by the affectionate nickname Tater.
Which stuck with him forever. And the source actually details a story from a shared flight they took that really highlights how intertwined their careers and their creative processes were.
I love this story.
So Hank Williams told Jimmy that he needed a new hit song. They were on an airplane together. Just Jimmy Dickens, Hank Williams, the legendary comedian Minnie Pearl, and Minnie's husband, Henry Cannon.
What a passenger list.
Right. Hank sits down on this flight, and in just 20 minutes, writes the foundational American standard, Hey, Good Lookin'.
20 minutes. Unbelievable.
And he wrote it specifically for Jimmy. But a week later, Hank took the song into the studio and recorded it himself.
Oh, man.
He jokingly told Dickens, that song's too good for you.
It is an incredible anecdote about the creation of a classic.
Wait, so Hank writes this on a plane for Jimmy and then just records it himself a week later. Was that considered standard practice back then, or was Hank just pulling rank because he was the bigger star?
It was absolutely a case of pulling rank, but it also reflects the ruthless pragmatism of the industry at that time. Songwriters back then were hustlers. Hank Williams was a genius, but he was also acutely aware of his own commercial value.
He knew what he had.
Exactly. When he finished Hey Good Lookin' and realized he had an absolute goldmine of a pop crossover hit on his hands, that realization superseded any informal promise he made to a friend on an airplane. The power dynamics meant that the artist with the most leverage got the best material, even if they had to steal it from their friends.
And Dickens' response to getting a guaranteed hit stolen from him was remarkably composed. The source notes that he simply replied, Much obliged, Hiram.
Hiram, of course, being Hank Williams' actual first name.
Right.
That brief exchange is a perfect window into the culture among these pioneers. It was a fiercely competitive environment, but it was underpinned by a deep, almost familial affection. Jimmy calling him Hiram was a subtle, sharp needle right back at him.
Reminding him who he really is.
Yeah, it signaled that they were competitors, but they were also peers who knew each other completely.
Dickens clearly knew he couldn't rely solely on his peers for material, so he continued building his own musical infrastructure. In 1950, he formed a group called the Country Boys. He surrounded himself with elite session talent like Jabbo Arrington, Grady Martin, Bob Moore, and Thumbs Carlyle.
And his eye for talent extended well beyond his own backing band. While he was out on tour with the Grand Ole Opry Roadshow, Dickens happened to be at a television station in Phoenix, Arizona.
Just passing through.
Right, and while there, he discovered a young, unknown singer and effectively brought him to the music industry's attention. That singer was Marty Robbins.
Wow, Marty Robbins.
Who would go on to become a massive star and a fellow Country Music Hall of Famer. Dickens operated as a catalyst for the broader genre, actively scouting and elevating the next generation.
As the 1950s progressed, Jimmy kept pushing his own boundaries. In 1957, he made the decision to leave the Grand Ole Opry to tour with the Philip Morris Country Music Show.
We really need to pause and look at what that specific tour represented. The Philip Morris Country Music Show is a massive, corporate-sponsored tobacco tour.
Which sounds very 1950s.
It really does. But before this kind of corporate backing, country music touring often meant playing in high school gymnasiums or small local theaters with very minimal setup.
Basically whatever they could fit in a car.
Exactly. Having a giant corporate sponsor meant they were bringing unprecedented stadium-level production value, professional lighting, advanced sound systems, massive staging, bringing all of that to regional towns that had never seen a country show of that scale. It professionalized the touring circuit.
And that ambition to push the music to new places culminated in a staggering milestone a few years later. The source highlights that in 1964, little Jimmy Dickens became the very first country artist to circle the globe while on tour.
If we consider the broader history of the genre, country music in the first half of the 20th century was strictly regional, mostly confined to the American South and Midwest. For a singer from Bolt, West Virginia, to physically carry this music around the entire planet was completely unprecedented.
He's taking country music to the world.
He was acting as a global ambassador, proving that the genre had a viable, worldwide audience.
That global exposure seemed to perfectly set the stage for his commercial peak. In 1965, he released what would become his biggest hit, May the Bird of Paradise Fly Up Your Nose.
What a title.
It reached #1 on the U.S. country chart, which is impressive on its own, but it also climbed all the way to number 15 on the mainstream pop chart.
That crossover success is a statistical anomaly that really deserves careful analysis. Think about the cultural landscape of 1965.
Right, the Beatles.
Exactly. This is the absolute peak of the British invasion. The charts are dominated by the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the monumental hits coming out of Motown. For a traditional country artist to pierce through that specific cultural noise with a novelty track and land at number 15 on the pop charts is staggering.
It really is.
It proves that pure comedy and undeniable personality possess a universal appeal that can override rigid genre boundaries.
Following that massive peak, the late 1960s and early 1970s marked a period of significant transition for Dickens, both professionally and personally. Professionally, he left Columbia Records, which had been his label home since 1948. He spent some time at Decca Records before eventually moving to United Artists in 1971.
A lot of label shifting.
Yeah. But the source also provides a poignant look at his personal life during this era, reminding us that his timeline wasn't solely defined by hit records.
The personal context is vital for understanding the full scope of his life.
He was married 3 times. His first marriage was to Connie Chapman in 1944, which ended in divorce in 1955. Later that same year, he married Ernestine Jones. Tragically, in 1968, Ernestine was killed in an automobile accident while traveling in Texas.
Awful.
He navigated that profound grief while maintaining his demanding career and eventually married Mona Evans in 1971. He also had 2 daughters, Pamela and Lisa. It anchors the larger-than-life Rhinestone persona in a very real human experience of resilience.
And that resilience carried him right into the next defining era of his career. Having weathered the shifting musical landscapes of the 60s and early 70s, he began to position himself as a foundational pillar of the industry.
That transition was formalized in 1975 when he made a triumphant return to the Grand Ole Opry. And then, the ultimate validation of his life's work arrived in 1983 when little Jimmy Dickens was officially inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame.
Earning a place in the Hall of Fame is the highest honor in the field. It officially shifted his status from a popular entertainer to an acknowledged architect of the genre. But rather than retiring to a quiet life as a legacy act, he found an entirely new medium to engage with audiences.
He absolutely capitalized on the music video era.
Yes, he did.
In 1984, he made a highly memorable appearance in Hank Williams Jr.'s iconic video for All My Rowdy Friends Are Coming Over Tonight. It was a brilliant way to bridge the generational gap, especially given his deep history with Hank Williams Sr.
It introduced his distinct visual style to the MTV generation. and he continued that strategy well into the later stages of his life.
Toward the end of his career, he became a beloved fixture in the music videos of Brad Paisley, who was also a West Virginia native.
A nice connection there.
Dickens didn't just make silent cameos either. He was heavily featured on several of Paisley's albums in these elaborate bonus comedy tracks. They formed a recurring comedic group alongside other Opry legends like George Jones and Bill Anderson. They humorously called themselves the Kung Pao Buckaroos.
The Kung Pao Buckaroos bits were a brilliant late career move. It allowed Dickens to introduce his legendary comedic timing to an audience that might not have even been born when he charted his first hits in the 1940s.
Completely new fans.
And his sense of humor only seemed to sharpen as he aged. He regularly hosted segments at the Opry, relying heavily on sharp, self-deprecating jokes. One of his signature lines was introducing himself to the crowd as Willie Nelson after taxes.
That joke operates on so many levels. It plays on his own famously short stature and physical resemblance to Willie in their later years, while perfectly skewering Willie Nelson's highly publicized issues with the IRS at the time.
He was incredibly sharp.
And he was also incredibly willing to play along with modern pop culture. He refused to act like a rigid traditionalist.
His appearance at the 2011 Country Music Association Awards, the CMAs, is a perfect example of that adaptability.
He was in his 90s, and he walked out dressed as Justin Bieber.
So funny.
Specifically to poke fun at a paternity scandal Bieber was dealing with in the tabloid media at the time. He retained that mischievous Jimmy the Kid energy right up to the very end.
He remained a dedicated performer until his physical health finally prevented it. The timeline of his passing illustrates just how devoted he was to the Opry stage.
Little Jimmy Dickens made his final appearance at the Grand Ole Opry on December 19, 2014, which happened to be his 94th birthday.
Wow.
Just 6 days later, on Christmas Day, he suffered a stroke and had to be hospitalized. He passed away from cardiac arrest a few days later on January 2, 2015, at the age of 94.
It is really worth noting that at the time of his death, following the passing of Hank Lachlan in 2009, Jimmy Dickens held the title of the oldest living member of the Grand Ole Opry.
The elder states,
and the industry honored him accordingly. His funeral was held at the Grand Ole Opry House itself, and he was entombed in the Cross Mausoleum at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville.
Looking at the totality of the source material, it is an incredibly dense, full life. A performer who started out grinding on local radio syndication in West Virginia introduced the defining visual aesthetic of country music and eventually became its first truly global ambassador.
If we distill all of this down for you, the listener, the fundamental takeaway is about the power of authenticity. Little Jimmy Dickens proved that you do not need to fit a predetermined traditional mold to achieve legendary status.
You don't have to be the standard leading man.
Exactly. He recognized early on that he couldn't play that conventional role. Instead, he took his height and his acerbic humor, wrapped them in heavy rhinestone embroidery, and basically demanded the industry's attention. He weaponized what made him different.
He turned his perceived limitations into his greatest commercial assets.
And that leaves us with a final thought to consider today. We look at the rhinestone suits now as a deeply serious, foundational tradition in country music culture.
It's iconic.
It is, but it originated with a performer who was primarily known for novelty songs and sharp comedy. It makes you wonder how many of our most deeply held traditions, whether in art, in our broader culture, or even in the daily routines of our own workplaces, actually started as a wild, funny experiment by someone who is simply trying to figure out a way to stand out from the crowd.
That is a fascinating perspective to leave off on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Little Jimmy Dickens. Keep exploring, keep questioning the origins of the traditions around you, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.